A struggling single dad buys ice cream for a stranger's crying child, thinking it's just another small act of kindness. What he doesn't know is the boy's mother is a billionaire hiding in plain sight. And this one moment of compassion will turn his entire world upside down. This is a story about second chances, unexpected love, and discovering that sometimes the smallest kindness can lead to the biggest transformation. If you believe in the power of doing good, stay with us. This one might just change the way you see the world. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The hum of the engine sputtered as Jesse eased his beat-up truck into the gas station lot, the brakes groaning like the rest of his life. The tank had been running on fumes for the past 2 days, and he was gambling on the last $15 in his account to carry them through until Friday's paycheck. If the paycheck cleared, if the transmission held up, if the landlord didn't knock. Just a few gallons, he muttered to himself, stepping out and inserting his card like he was making a deal with the universe. The screen blinked red once, then approved. A tiny win. He exhaled. In the passenger seat, Lily was humming a made-up tune to herself, her sneakers kicking against the glove compartment. Her hair was tied in a loose braid, half undone from her own restless fingers, and her cheeks were smudged with whatever snack she'd been hoarding in her pocket. "Daddy," she said, twisting in her booster seat, "can we get ice cream?" Her voice was hopeful, not demanding. That's what killed him. He looked through the windshield at the tiny freezer chest tucked beside the station's front door, the kind with a faded sticker of a smiling cartoon cone and allowed $2.50 per bar. Jesse offered a half smile. "Not today, Bug, but it's still sunny." He sighed and opened the driver's side door, sliding back in behind the wheel. "I know. Maybe after the weekend, okay?" She didn't argue, just stared out the window, the light in her eyes dimming a bit. Jesse felt the twist in his gut. She never whined. Not about the hand-me-down clothes or the peanut butter dinners. He wished she would sometimes. Maybe then he could allow himself to admit how much he hated this, how much it tore him up to say no to something so small. The gas pump clicked. That was it. $10 of fuel and $5 left to stretch until the end of the week. He didn't know it yet, but $5 wouldn't matter in a few hours, because somewhere down the boardwalk, a stranger was about to enter their lives, and with her, everything was about to change. The boardwalk creaked beneath Jesse's boots as he and Lily strolled past shuttered souvenir shops and sun-faded signs flapping in the breeze. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and burnt orange, the last light of day stretching long shadows over the planks. The wind carried the scent of salt and sugar, melted taffy, popcorn, sunscreen, things that reminded Jesse of better summers, simpler ones. He glanced at Lily, who was walking with her head down, dragging her sneaker toe along the edges of the wood. She hadn't said much since he turned down the ice cream. That quiet disappointment. He felt it in his chest like a weight. He wanted to say something, offer her a distraction, but then he heard it, crying, loud, desperate, and shrill. It cut through the hum of seagulls and crashing waves like a siren. Jesse turned instinctively, his eyes landing on a small figure crouched in front of an old ice cream cart, its neon sign flickering half-lit, above the words, "Benny's Famous Cones." The cart's freezer lid hung ajar, and a fresh splatter of white and pink melted across the boards beneath it. The kid couldn't have been older than 4. Blonde curls plastered to his forehead with sweat, cheeks blotchy and red from crying. He was sobbing into his fists, rocking slightly, like if he didn't move, he'd fall apart completely. Jesse moved without thinking. "Hey, buddy," he said, crouching beside the boy. "You okay?" The boy looked up, eyes glassy and panicked. "It fell," he choked out. "I dropped it. She said I could pick any flavor and I dropped it, and now she's going to be mad." "No one's going to be mad," Jesse said gently. "It was just an accident." The boy pointed to the ice cream cart, which was clearly closed. The vendor had stepped away. A handwritten sign read, "Back in 10." Lily stood beside Jessie now, watching the boy with quiet sympathy. She whispered, "He's really sad, Daddy." Jessie looked down at the kid, then at the cart, then at his wallet. He still had the 5 from the gas station. He sighed. "Wait here." He walked up to a nearby food shack, still open, blaring music, overpriced everything, and bought the cheapest vanilla cone they had. It cost him exactly $4.75. That left 25 cents to his name. He knelt again and handed it to the boy. "Here you go, champ." The boy's sobs hiccuped to a stop. He stared at the cone, then at Jessie, then slowly his tiny fingers wrapped around it. "Thank you," he whispered, voice hoarse. Jessie smiled. "No problem." He stood, brushed his hands on his jeans, and took Lily's hand again. As they turned to walk away, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. A woman's voice, low, rushed, worried, called out into the wind. "There you are!" Jessie turned just in time to see her. Sharp green eyes, hair pulled back, breathless, relieved. She ran straight to the boy and scooped him into her arms. "Mommy!" the boy cried. And just like that, the stranger entered Jessie's life. He just didn't know it yet. She reached them in a flurry of footsteps, breath-catching, as she dropped to her knees beside the boy. Her blazer was slightly wrinkled, white blouse clinging to her back with sweat, but her presence was undeniable, polished, commanding, like someone who was used to walking into a room and owning it. Not here, though, not now. "Oh, my God, Ben," she said, pulling the boy close. "You can't just run off like that. Don't ever do that again, sweetheart, okay?" Ben clung to her, still sniffling, the half-eaten cone melting down his fingers. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, then looked up, and her eyes landed on Jessie. Their gazes locked. She stood slowly, shifting her son to one hip with practiced ease. There was something guarded in her expression, as if calculating how much to reveal, how much to hold back. "Did you?" she asked, gesturing toward the cone. Jessie gave a small nod. He dropped his first one, just figured he could use another. Her lips parted slightly, like she wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with a price tag. She looked down at Ben, who was still sticky but calm, then back at Jessie. "Thank you," she said, voice soft but deliberate. "Really, I should have been watching him. I looked away for 1 second and—" She trailed off, biting the inside of her cheek. Jessie just shrugged. "It happens." She looked at him again, studying him like she was trying to place where he fit in the world. His oil-stained jeans, the faded T-shirt, the quiet steadiness in his posture. He didn't look uncomfortable, didn't demand anything. Not attention, not thanks. Claire reached into her purse, pulling out a sleek black wallet. "Please, let me at least pay you back." Jessie raised a hand. "No need." "It's just ice cream." "No, it's not," she said, her tone sharper than she meant, then softer. "It's more than that. You didn't have to stop." "I've got a kid too," he said, nodding toward Lily. "Can't walk past a crying kid without doing something, you know." She glanced at Lily and offered a tired smile. "She's beautiful." "Thanks," Jessie said, reaching for Lily's hand. "Come on, Bug." He turned to leave. "Wait," the woman said quickly. Jessie paused. She hesitated. "I'm Claire." He nodded once. "Jessie." She looked like she wanted to say more, something pressing, something personal, but it caught in her throat. "Well, thank you again, Jessie." He gave her a small nod, then walked away, hand in hand with Lily, disappearing into the dusky light. Claire stood there, the cone still dripping in Ben's hand, and watched them until they were gone. She didn't tell him who she was, not yet, but she would. The walk back to the truck was quiet. Lily's little fingers gripped Jessie's calloused hand, swinging gently between them. The boardwalk behind them was thinning out, families heading home, couples strolling into the glow of evening lights. Jessie didn't look back. Moments like that weren't meant to linger. "Was that his mom?" Lily asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Jessie replied. "She found him." "She looked fancy," Lily said, kicking a pebble, "like the ladies in the magazines at the checkout." Jessie chuckled under his breath. "Maybe, But even fancy people lose track of their kids sometimes. He didn't say it out loud, but there was something about her, something that didn't sit like wealth usually did, not the usual sharpness or condescension. She'd looked more tired than anything, worn down in a way money couldn't fix. As they reached the truck, Jesse lifted Lily into her seat and buckled her in, fingers moving on autopilot. His mind was still half on the woman's face. The relief in her eyes, the hesitation, like she wasn't sure how to say thank you, or maybe not used to having to. He started the engine. It coughed once, then rumbled to life. A good sign. One less thing to worry about, for tonight at least. He was about to pull out of the lot when he heard tapping on the window. He turned, and there she was, Claire. Holding something in her hand, Jesse rolled the window down halfway. "Everything all right?" She handed him a crisp 20 for the ice cream and the kindness. He looked at the bill, then back at her. "I didn't do it for money," he said, voice calm but firm. "Keep it. I insist." He shook his head. "Seriously, just pay it forward." Claire stared at him, unsure. People didn't say no to her, not in her world. Not ever. Jesse offered a small smile. "It's just ice cream." She hesitated, then slowly lowered her hand. "Thank you, Jesse." He gave a short nod. "Take care of your boy." And just like that, the window rolled back up, the truck pulled away, and she was left standing there in the fading light, watching the red taillights disappear into the night. Jesse didn't expect to see her again. He was wrong. The door creaked as Jesse pushed it open, the hinges groaning like they hadn't been oiled in years, which they hadn't. The apartment smelled faintly of old takeout and lemon cleaner, an odd combination of effort and resignation. Lily kicked off her shoes and dropped her backpack by the door like always, humming quietly as she skipped into the small living room where her crayon drawings still clung to the walls with curling tape. Jesse shut the door behind him and leaned against it for a second, just long enough to close his eyes, just long enough to let the weight of the day settle in his bones. The fridge buzzed angrily from the kitchenette, a loud dying whir like a motor gasping for air. He walked over and opened it, half a jug of milk, a stick of butter, 3 eggs, and some leftovers in a plastic container he didn't remember putting there. He pressed the back of his hand to the inside wall. Barely cool. He cursed under his breath and shut it harder than he meant to. "Is the fridge broken again?" Lily called from the couch. "It's just tired," Jesse said. "Like me." He walked over to the stack of mail on the counter. The top envelope was stamped in red. Final notice. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it said. The others weren't much better. Electric, phone, water, all juggling acts in a circus he never signed up for. Then came the knock. 3 short raps, sharp and deliberate. Jesse stiffened. He already knew. He opened the door to reveal Mr. Pacheco, the landlord, mid-60s, balding, and always dressed like he was headed to a funeral, even when it was just to collect rent. "Evening, Jesse," he said, not unkindly, "just stopping by." "I know," Jesse said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm short this week." "I figured," Mr. Pacheco replied. "You've been good about it, but I got my own bills. I can give you until Monday. After that," Jesse nodded, "I'll figure something out." Pacheco gave him a long look, then nodded once and left. Jesse closed the door quietly and leaned against it again. He looked over at Lily, curled up on the couch, drawing a picture of what looked like a unicorn wearing a baseball cap. She didn't know, not yet, and he wasn't ready for her to. The city glowed beneath her like a constellation made of glass and steel. Claire stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, arms folded tightly across her chest. A half-drunk glass of wine forgotten on the table behind her. Below, cars weaved through traffic like ants chasing headlights. The soundproofed silence in the room only made it all feel more distant, more unreal. Her heels sat abandoned near the couch. Her jacket was draped over a bar stool, and her blouse was still wrinkled from the frantic drive earlier when she'd lost sight of Ben on the boardwalk. She exhaled sharply at the memory, the panic that had clutched her chest like a vice. 1 second, 1 breath, 1 glance away, and he was gone. Her fingers still trembled when she thought about it, but it wasn't just the fear that lingered, it was him, Jesse. She didn't know who he was, some mechanic, judging by his clothes and the grease under his nails, but there was something about the way he looked at her, not with recognition, not with judgment, just calm, quiet concern. Like helping a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. No questions, no assumptions, no asking what she did for a living or where she was from, just kindness. Claire turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen, flicking on a dim light. The place was pristine, polished marble, untouched appliances, a designer refrigerator stocked by assistants who made sure she never had to think about groceries. And yet, despite everything around her, the space felt cold, staged, like a hotel suite you could never quite claim as your own. She poured herself another splash of wine, but it tasted sour now. She set it down. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another email. Board meeting at 9 a.m. New investor concerns. Press release edits. She didn't open it. Instead, she opened her notes app and typed a name she didn't want to forget. Jesse, no last name, no number. Just a man who gave his last few dollars to comfort a child he didn't know and expected nothing in return. Claire stared at the name, then locked the screen and set the phone down gently. She had all the power and money in the world. He opened it slowly, warily. Inside was a folded piece of paper, and beneath it, a stack of crisp $100 bills. Jesse blinked, counted once, then again. $500. He looked around as if someone might be watching him from the bushes, waiting to see his reaction. But the street was quiet. Just a delivery truck humming down the corner, and old Mrs. Gaines across the street watering her petunias like clockwork. He unfolded the note. It was short. No signature. Thank you for the ice cream. And for being the kind of person this world needs more of. His throat tightened. He looked at the bills again. They weren't charity bills, not stuffed into a collection envelope or taped to a flyer for donations. They were intentional, clean, deliberate. Whoever sent this knew him, or at least knew enough to understand what $500 meant to a man like Jesse. He stood there for a long time, the note in one hand, the envelope in the other. Part of him wanted to be suspicious, because when was the last time anything good came without strings? But there were no strings, no name, no request, just gratitude. And for the first time in a long time, Jesse walked back inside with groceries on his mind instead of rent. A strange, cautious hope lingered in his chest. Not certainty, not comfort, just maybe. Jesse stood at the kitchen table, holding the envelope in one hand, the note in the other. The stack of $100 bills still sat untouched on the countertop. He traced his thumb over the handwriting, the neat curves of the letters. Something about it felt familiar, like he'd seen it before. Maybe in passing. Maybe in the rushed scrawl of someone trying to scribble a name onto a child's school form or sign a hurried thank you note. But he couldn't place it, not yet. He looked back at the money. 5 crisp bills. A number that felt absurd to him, a man used to counting quarters for gas. It wasn't that he didn't need it, he absolutely did, but that was the problem. No one gave money like that without expecting something in return. Nothing ever came without strings. He set the envelope down, rubbing the back of his neck as he paced the tiny space between the table and the sink. The fridge rattled again, louder this time, and the faucet still dripped despite his best attempts to fix it. The world around him hadn't changed. The money hadn't fixed anything yet, and it never would if there was some kind of catch. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was soft, hesitant. She was standing in the doorway, her pajamas too short at the ankles. "What's that?" "Just something someone sent," Jesse said, folding the note and slipping it back into the envelope. "Who sent it?" Jesse hesitated. He couldn't say for sure, but he had an idea. Claire. Her name came unbidden, the image of her standing there on the boardwalk flashing in his mind, those sharp green eyes, the quiet tension in her voice when she thanked him, the way she hesitated before saying her name. Now, holding the note in his hand, he swore it matched the handwriting she'd used on a scrap piece of paper to jot her number after asking for help with the stroller's busted wheel. But why? "Just someone saying thanks," he finally answered, ruffling Lily's hair. "Don't worry about it." As Lily wandered off, Jesse picked up the envelope again. He stared at it for a long moment, turning it over, running his fingers along the edge. "Who are you, Claire?" he murmured, a quiet question to an empty room. The garage door rattled as it opened, the morning sunlight spilling onto the oil-stained floor. Jesse wiped his hands on a rag, glancing up just as the low, throaty rumble of a vintage engine coughed to a halt outside. The car was old, classic lines, gleaming chrome, the kind of machine you didn't see around here. And from the look of it, the thing hadn't been driven in years. The hood was puffing faint wisps of steam, the paint chipped at the corners. And behind the wheel was her, Claire. He froze for half a second, then forced himself to keep moving, grabbing his wrench and heading toward the car. She was out before he could say a word, smoothing her skirt, her son trailing behind her. Ben, Jesse remembered, with his mop of blonde hair and wide eyes. He was clinging to her hand, looking around the garage with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "Jesse?" Claire said, her voice firm but almost nervous. "I hope I'm not intruding." What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice careful, even. "My father's car," she said, nodding toward the Classic parked in front of them. "It's been sitting in storage for years. I brought it out to drive, but it stalled a few blocks from here. I need it fixed." Jesse's eyes narrowed slightly. "You found me on purpose." She didn't deny it. "Yes," she admitted, after a beat. "I did. Why?" "Because," she said, her tone softening, "you're the only person I trust to do this." He stared at her, trying to read between the lines. Claire stood tall, composed as ever, but there was something underneath it, something raw and unspoken. Jesse looked at Ben, who was now crouching near a toolbox, poking at a wrench with quiet fascination. It was impossible to miss the way Claire's hand lingered protectively near his shoulder. "Let me get this straight," Jesse said, crossing his arms. "You just happened to have your father's Classic breakdown near my shop?" Claire tilted her head slightly, a faint smile on her lips. "Coincidence," she said. "Of course." He snorted softly, shaking his head. But even as he turned toward the car, popping the hood and peering inside, he could feel her eyes on him, steady, watchful. She wasn't here just for the car. He didn't know why she'd come back, but something about her presence set his nerves on edge. For now, though, he focused on the engine, his hands moving instinctively over the familiar parts. Claire stood behind him, silent, while Ben wandered around the garage. Jesse worked quickly, but his mind raced. Who was this woman? And what did she really want from him? The diner was one of those places that hadn't changed since the 70s. Vinyl booths with faded stripes, the faint hum of an ancient jukebox, and a waitress who called everyone Hun. Jesse hadn't been there in years, and sitting in a booth across from Claire felt strange, like two worlds colliding in a way that didn't make sense. Lily was perched beside him, her legs swinging under the table. Across from her, Ben clutched a crayon in one hand and a kid's menu in the other, furiously scribbling on the back page. The two kids had clicked almost instantly, whispering to each other about their favorite colors and debating whether pancakes could be eaten for lunch. Claire sat straight-backed, the lines of her blazer sharp against the soft light of the diner. But her demeanor had softened. She ordered a milkshake for Ben without hesitation, then leaned back and nodded toward Jesse. "Get whatever you want," she said. "My treat." Jesse hesitated. He wasn't the kind of guy who let people pay for his meals, but the way she said it wasn't condescending. It was matter of fact, like she wasn't offering charity, just a simple gesture. "Sure," he said finally, thumbing through the menu. He landed on a burger and fries. Lily, of course, picked the pancake plate. When the food came, the kids dived in, giggling over syrup and trading crayon doodles. Jesse took a slow bite of his burger, watching them. They looked like they'd known each other forever, like they belonged here together. And for a moment, the tight knot in his chest loosened. Claire caught his eye and smiled. It wasn't the polished, professional smile she'd had when they first met. This was different, genuine, relaxed. It made her look younger, more human. "Hard to keep up with them, huh?" she said, nodding toward the kids. Jesse chuckled, surprising himself. "Yeah, they've got more energy than I've had in years." She laughed, too, and it was a light, melodic sound. Not the laugh of someone trying to impress or charm, just honest amusement. Jesse hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd heard laughter that wasn't strained or forced. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt normal. He felt like the guy he used to be, the one who could sit in a diner with someone and share a laugh without the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The shop was quiet except for the hum of a fan, turning lazily overhead. Jesse stood by the workbench, turning a wrench over in his hands. He wasn't looking at Claire, not directly. She was leaning against the frame of the open garage door, sunlight outlining her in a way that made her seem like she didn't quite belong there. Too poised, too polished for a place that smelled of grease and motor oil. He could feel her watching him, waiting. This wasn't the kind of conversation he was used to having, not here. "So what's the catch?" Jesse asked, his tone flat, almost resigned. "There isn't one," Claire said evenly. She was calm, measured. "I just need someone I can trust." He finally glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Trust me? With what?" She gestured toward the classic car sitting in the corner, its faded paint and rusted edges catching the light. "My father's car. It's been sitting in storage for years. I want it restored, properly. And I don't want to hand it off to some high-end shop that's just going to slap on a fresh coat of paint and call it a day." "You think I'm your guy for that?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I know you are," she said firmly. Jesse's eyes narrowed. "You're offering a lot of money for a job you could get done anywhere else. Why me?" Claire stepped forward, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. "Because you care about the details. I saw how you handled my car earlier. You didn't rush. You didn't cut corners. You made sure it was right." She paused, her gaze steady. "That's what I need. Someone who won't rush this, who'll do it the way my father would have wanted." He leaned back against the bench, crossing his arms. "You don't even know me." "No," she admitted, "but I know enough. You're honest. You're good at what you do. And if that's not enough—" She reached into her bag and pulled out a check, holding it out to him. "This should cover parts, labor, and then some." Jesse stared at the check. It wasn't just some money. It was more than he'd seen in one place in years, enough to cover the bills piling up on his kitchen table, enough to buy a new fridge that actually worked, enough to breathe, but he didn't reach for it. "Why not someone else?" he asked. "Someone who's more like you." Claire's voice softened. "Because you're not like them. That's why." Jesse swallowed hard, looking at the car again, then back at the check in her hand. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The money was real, the opportunity was real, but something about it, about her, made him hesitate. "No strings," she said quietly, almost like a promise. "Just the car." Jesse's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, still unsure. "All right, I'll take a look." Claire smiled. It wasn't triumphant. It was almost relieved. The coffee shop buzzed with low chatter, the smell of fresh-baked pastries mingling with the sharp tang of espresso. In the corner, two women leaned in close over their steaming mugs, their voices just loud enough to carry across the room. "She's been here every day this week," one said, her nails tapping the table. "I saw her car parked outside Jesse's shop again this morning." "Same car?" the other woman asked, stirring her coffee. "The old one?" "Yeah, the classic one. The one she brought in a few days ago. I thought she'd pick it up and be done, but no, she's still hanging around." The second woman raised an eyebrow. "Maybe she likes him," the first scoffed. "Jesse, no offense, but she doesn't look like someone who hangs out with mechanics. She's got designer shoes, perfect hair. You know the type. She's not local. Maybe she's got a thing for small-town guys, the second woman said with a shrug. The whole rugged, down-to-earth thing. Please, the first woman said, rolling her eyes. She's not here for romance. I heard she's some kind of businesswoman, big time. Probably slumming it here for a tax break or something. Still, the second woman said, lowering her voice. It's weird, isn't it? First, she shows up out of nowhere. Now she's at the shop every day, and Jessie's not exactly the type to, mix with her kind. The first woman nodded, her lips pursed. I'm just saying, if she's still hanging around next week, I'm going to start asking questions. What does she want with him? What's she even doing in this town? The second woman glanced toward the window, where the sleek vintage car was parked down the street. Guess we'll find out soon enough. The fire crackled softly, sending faint sparks into the cool night air. The kids were finally asleep, tucked into makeshift sleeping bags under the tent just a few feet away. Their quiet, rhythmic breathing mixed with the rustle of leaves in the slight breeze. Jessie poked at the logs with a stick, the embers glowing a deeper red. Claire sat on a folding chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't look as composed as usual. Her hair was loose, falling in gentle waves over the collar of her jacket. In the firelight, she seemed softer, less guarded. Still, her eyes held that same intensity, like she was constantly deciding what to say, what to hold back. You're not really a camping kind of person, are you? Jessie said, breaking the silence. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. What gave it away? Something about the shoes, he said, gesturing toward the pair of pristine hiking boots she'd bought that afternoon. Brand new. Still look like they're on display at the store. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You got me. I think the last time I did anything close to this, I was a kid, maybe 10. Why'd you stop? Her expression faltered, and she looked down at her hands. The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the faint lines of worry that she usually kept well hidden. Life happened, she said quietly. Things changed. I changed. Jessie leaned back against a rock, waiting. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared into the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost too soft to hear. My parents weren't the kind of people who slowed down. It was all goals, ambition, expectations. She let out a slow breath. Once they decided I was the heir to the company, the childhood stuff stopped. No more camping trips, no more just being a kid. Jessie didn't push, didn't fill the silence. He just listened. She glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. You're lucky, she said. You've had time to figure out who you are, without someone deciding it for you. Jessie snorted, shaking his head. Yeah, well, figuring out who you are isn't always easy when you're just trying to survive. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Still, it's something. They sat quietly for a while, the fire popping now and then, the stars spread wide above them. For the first time, Jessie saw her not as a polished CEO or a mysterious stranger, but as someone who had walls of her own. Walls she wasn't ready to tear down yet, but maybe, just maybe, was willing to let him see. The sharp knock on Claire's office door echoed through the quiet of the morning. She was perched on the edge of her desk, phone in hand, scrolling through emails she had no intention of answering right away. A small pile of untouched paperwork sat in a neat stack beside her, a reminder of the responsibilities she'd been dodging for days. "Come in," she said, setting her phone down. Morgan entered briskly, tablet clutched to her chest, her usual calm replaced with a tautness around her mouth. She shut the door behind her, the faint click punctuating the tension in the room. "Claire," Morgan began, her voice low, almost hesitant, "we have a problem." Claire's brows lifted, but she didn't move from her seat. "Define problem." "Reporters," Morgan said bluntly. "A couple of them have been sniffing around Windmere, asking questions. Following up on that car restoration story, we tried to keep off the radar." Claire's stomach tightened, but her face remained impassive. And, Morgan pressed, It's only a matter of time before someone puts the pieces together. You've been out there too often. It's not your usual schedule. People notice. They talk. Claire leaned back slightly, folding her arms. Let them talk. It's a small town. Morgan stepped closer, lowering her voice further. Small towns have long memories. Once the media gets wind that you've been spending so much time with a local mechanic and his daughter, it's going to look like... Like what? Claire interrupted, her tone sharper now. Like I'm living my life? Like you're not handling your business, Morgan shot back. The board is already whispering. They see the photos, the social media posts, even if we try to bury them. If you keep showing up there, it won't take long before someone spins this into a PR nightmare. You know that. Claire's jaw tightened. She pushed herself off the desk and walked to the window, staring out at the city. She didn't like being told what to do, not by reporters, not by the board, and certainly not by her assistant, no matter how capable Morgan was. I'll handle it, she said finally, her voice controlled. By staying out of Windmere, Morgan pressed, by going back to being the boss, the public face of this company. That's what they expect. Claire didn't answer right away. Her eyes remained on the skyline, her thoughts drifting back to the garage, to Jesse's hands covered in grease, to the way he'd looked at her like she was just another person, not a name or a brand. She turned, her gaze steady. I said I'll handle it. Morgan studied her for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod and left the room. Claire stood there, feeling the weight of the decision she wasn't ready to make. The world was closing in again, demanding she play the part, wear the mask. But for now, just for a little longer, she chose not to. The sun hovered low on the horizon, casting long, golden reflections over the waves. Jesse stood ankle-deep in the surf, tossing a tennis ball for Lily and Ben to chase as they splashed through the shallows. Their laughter carried over the sound of the tide, filling the evening air with a kind of joy Jesse hadn't felt in years. Even Claire seemed at ease, seated on a weathered blanket with her sandals kicked off, the breeze playing through her hair. Ben's energy seemed limitless. He darted after Lily, trying to beat her to the ball, tripping in the water and scrambling up again like he couldn't afford to waste a single moment. Jesse smiled at the sight, throwing the ball just far enough to keep them running. All right, you two, last one, he called. As they raced off, Jesse turned to Claire. This is the quietest I've seen you all week. She gave him a rare, soft smile. It's nice, watching them play. Yeah, he agreed, it is. Then it happened. Ben stumbled, clutching his stomach. It wasn't the playful trip they'd seen before. His knees buckled, and he fell hard into the sand. The boy didn't get up. Jesse was running before he even knew he'd moved. The wet sand slowed him down, each step heavier than the last, until he was kneeling beside Ben, lifting the small, limp body into his arms. Ben, Jesse said urgently. Hey, buddy, can you hear me? Claire's voice broke through the rising panic. What's wrong? What happened? She was rushing toward them, her face pale, her eyes wide. I don't know, Jesse said. He just went down. Ben's eyes fluttered open briefly, then shut again. His breathing was shallow, faint. Jesse didn't think. He acted. He scooped the boy up and turned to Claire. We need to get him off the beach. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. She nodded, stumbling as she tried to keep up. They made it to the car, Jesse's arms steady, despite the weight of Ben and the pounding of his heart. Claire opened the door with shaking hands, and Jesse slid Ben into the back seat, propping him against Claire's lap. Keep him upright, he instructed, his voice steady but tight. Talk to him. Keep him awake. Claire nodded again, her lips trembling. She brushed the boy's hair back, whispering his name, pleading for him to open his eyes. Jesse started the engine, his grip firm on the wheel as they sped toward the nearest urgent care. His chest burned with worry, but his hand stayed steady. This wasn't the first time he'd had to hold it together when everything was falling apart. He just hoped this time would be enough. The car door creaked slightly as Jesse pulled it open, the sun dipping low in the sky and casting a golden light over the beach parking lot. Claire was still inside the diner, grabbing some water for the kids, leaving him alone with her vintage car. Its engine was idling faintly, rumbling like an old lion that refused to retire. He climbed into the driver's seat to adjust the heating controls. The chill had been creeping in, and he figured he'd spare Claire the trouble of fumbling with it when she got back. As he reached over to turn the dial, his hand brushed against the glove box latch. It popped open, spilling a few loose papers and a small framed photo onto the seat. Jesse froze. The photo wasn't what he expected. No carefree family portrait, no candid beach day snapshot. Instead, it was a formal picture. Claire, wearing a tailored gray suit, standing at the head of a long, glossy conference table. Behind her were people in sharp attire, their faces a mix of deference and focus. Claire was mid-speech, one hand gesturing confidently, a faint but commanding smile on her face. He picked up the photo carefully, as if it might shatter from his touch. The corporate logo etched onto the glass at the bottom corner tugged at his memory. He'd seen that logo before, on billboards, in magazines, on the news. He sat there, staring at the picture, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. Suddenly, the pieces started to shift, clicking into place. Her poise, her car, her clothes, her way of speaking, all of it pointed to something bigger than the image she'd presented at the boardwalk. Jesse had known she wasn't just some regular tourist passing through, but this was different. She wasn't just wealthy. She wasn't just successful. She was something else entirely. The door of the diner opened in the distance, the bell jingling faintly. Jesse quickly slid the photo back into the glove box, shutting it before Claire returned. But the image stayed with him, burning in his mind. The realization was unsettling, shifting everything he thought he knew about her. As she approached with 2 bottles of water in her hand and a small smile on her lips, he forced himself to look away from her eyes and back at the steering wheel. "Thanks for waiting," she said, climbing into the passenger seat. Jesse nodded, his grip on the wheel tightening. "Sure," he murmured, his voice a little lower, a little more guarded, because now he had questions, and he wasn't sure he wanted the answers. The dock was quiet, save for the gentle lapping of waves against the weathered wood. The sun hovered just above the horizon, casting a warm orange glow that seemed almost out of place, given the tension in the air. Jesse leaned on the railing, hands gripping the rough, sun-bleached edge, staring out at the endless expanse of water. His back was to her, but he could feel her presence behind him, hesitant, heavy. She cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "I owe you an explanation." Jesse didn't turn. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear it, but he nodded almost imperceptibly and waited. Claire took a deep breath. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am, about a lot of things." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "I figured as much." The words stung, but she didn't falter. "My name is Claire Wright. My family owns Wright Global Holdings. We're one of the largest privately held companies in the country." Now he did turn, slowly. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't neutral either. "Why hide that?" "Because it's not who I want to be anymore," she said simply. "Because when people hear that name, they don't see me. They see a brand. They see dollar signs. They see power." She stepped closer, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep something inside from spilling out. "I've spent my entire life being what everyone expected me to be, running boardrooms, building empires, and I got good at it, really good. But somewhere along the line I stopped being human." Jesse's brow furrowed. "You seem pretty human to me." Claire shook her head. "That's because you don't know the whole story. I left. I walked away from it all, my position, my name, the money, everything. I couldn't stand it anymore. I wanted to start over, find out who I am without all of that." He was quiet for a long moment. "So what? This is you starting over?" She met his eyes, her expression open, raw. "I thought if I kept it a secret I could be normal. I could just be a mom, make mistakes, be vulnerable. But then I met you, and suddenly, lying by omission didn't feel right anymore." Jesse studied her, his hand still gripping the railing. "What happens now?" Claire exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. "I don't know, but at least now you know the truth." Jesse nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the horizon. The waves kept lapping at the dock, the sun kept sinking. Nothing felt settled, but for the first time the air between them was clear. Jesse stared at the empty street as the dusk settled, his boots planted firmly on the gravel drive outside his shop. The air was thick, heavy in his chest, as if the whole sky had decided to lean in on him. Claire's words still rang in his ears, echoing through every corner of his mind. He couldn't look at her. Not yet. "It was never about the money," she said, her voice steady, but Jesse heard the crack just beneath it. "You have to believe that." He finally turned, meeting her gaze. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. Her hair was loose, catching the fading light, but for the first time since he'd met her, she looked small. She looked like someone who had said too much and was bracing for it to all fall apart. "You lied," Jesse said, the words calm, flat, "not just about who you are, about why you came here, about why you stayed." "I didn't know how to tell you," she replied quickly. "I didn't think you'd understand." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Understand what? That you're some big-time CEO who slums it in small towns for fun? That you can walk away from all that money and power and still have everything? People like me don't get to start over. We don't get clean slates." "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. "You think I don't know what it feels like to struggle?" "No," Jesse interrupted, stepping back. "You don't. Not the way I do. Not the way most people do." She opened her mouth to argue, but he didn't let her. "I fix engines," he said, his tone final. "That's what I do. I don't belong in your world, Claire. I never will." Her face crumpled for a brief moment before she caught herself, straightening her shoulders. But it was too late. Jesse had already seen the hurt flicker through her eyes, the flicker of regret. He didn't stay to watch her recover. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the shop, his steps heavy, his fists clenched at his sides. "Jesse!" she called. But her voice broke halfway through. He didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when every step he took felt like a weight pulling him down. The living room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp on the side table. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor as though the answers to her problems might be hiding in the worn carpet. Ben was at the coffee table, his tongue sticking out slightly as he worked with his crayons, completely absorbed in his task. It had been a long day, a long week. Claire hadn't slept more than a few hours at a stretch since Jesse had walked away. She could still hear his words, sharp and final, repeating in her mind, "I fix engines. I don't belong in your world." She had replayed that moment countless times, looking for something she could have said to make him stay. But the truth was, she didn't have the right words. Not then. Maybe not now. "Mommy?" Ben's voice broke through her thoughts. She lifted her head, blinking to focus on him. "What is it, sweetheart?" He held up a piece of paper with both hands, beaming. The drawing was simple, the lines a little wobbly, the colors running past the edges. But there was no mistaking what it showed. 3 stick figures stood in a row, their hands joined together. One with brown hair in a triangle dress, one tall and broad with a blue shirt, and one small, their arms reaching up to hold theirs. Above them, a bright yellow sun smiled down. Underneath, in careful blocky letters, he had written Jesse and Lily. "It's us," Ben said proudly. "Me and you and Jesse and Lily. We can all live together, right?" Claire stared at the drawing, her throat tightening. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she took the paper from Ben's hands. The crayon strokes felt warm, alive, and the simplicity of it hit her harder than any argument, any plea she could have made herself. "Right, Mommy?" Ben's voice was so hopeful, so certain. "Jesse can come back and fix cars, and you can read us stories, and we can all be together." Claire couldn't speak. The tears came quickly, hot and heavy, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed the picture against her chest, her fingers curling around the edges as she tried to breathe through the sobs. Ben frowned, his small face twisting with concern. "Mommy, what's wrong?" She pulled him close, hugging him tightly. "Nothing, sweetheart. It's just a beautiful picture, that's all." But inside she was breaking. Not because the drawing was unrealistic, but because for the first time she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like if it were true. The knock was soft, hesitant, just loud enough to be heard over the faint hum of the fridge in Jesse's kitchen. He looked up from the bills spread out on the table, his pen pausing mid-scribble. It wasn't a landlord's knock, not the sharp, impatient rapping he was used to. This knock was different. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans as he moved toward the door. A part of him hoped it wasn't who he thought it might be. Another part, buried deeper, hoped it was. When he opened the door, Claire was standing there. No blazer, no expensive heels, just a soft sweater and jeans, her hair loose, and a look on her face he'd never seen before, vulnerable, almost fragile. She wasn't the woman who had walked into his garage with a broken-down car and an air of control. She wasn't the poised CEO with a firm handshake and a calculated smile. She was just Claire. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. Jesse nodded, stepping aside. He didn't trust his voice to come out steady if he spoke just yet. She moved past him into the small, warm space, her eyes briefly scanning the living room before settling on him again. They stood in silence for a moment, Jessie still by the door, Claire near the couch. She shifted her weight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I need to say something," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "and I need you to listen. Please." Jesse leaned back against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He nodded once. "I'm listening." Claire took a deep breath. "I'm not here as the CEO of anything. I'm not here because of some business deal or investment or whatever you think I'm trying to sell. I'm here because—" She hesitated, her voice catching, but she forced herself to continue. "Because I want to be." Jesse's brows furrowed, his arms tightening across his chest. "I don't want a partner for business," she said, her voice growing stronger now. "I want one for life." The words hung in the air, heavy and honest. Claire's eyes were locked on his, unwavering, despite the tears that threatened to spill over. She didn't back down, didn't waver. It was the most real, the most raw Jesse had ever seen her. And for a long, stretched moment, he didn't say a word. The silence between them was loud, filled with all the questions, doubts, and fears he didn't know how to put into words. But Claire stood there, steady, waiting. Jesse stared at the steaming coffee cup in his hands, the chipped ceramic warm against his palms. The kitchen was quiet. Lily was at a friend's house, and the soft tick of the clock on the wall was the only sound. But inside, his thoughts churned like a storm, clashing with every instinct he'd relied on to keep himself grounded. Her words from the night before wouldn't leave him. "I don't want a partner for business. I want one for life." She'd said it with such calm certainty, like it was the simplest truth in the world. But for Jesse, it wasn't simple, not even close. He'd spent years believing he didn't deserve more than what he had. More than a small garage, more than a paycheck-to-paycheck existence, more than keeping his head down and doing his best for Lily. Wanting more always seemed like a risk he couldn't afford. Even now, with her words still ringing in his ears, doubt crept in. Who was he to think he could belong in Claire's world, in her life? But then he thought of the moments that had led them here, the way she'd smiled when Lily made her laugh, the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with respect, like she saw him for who he really was, not just what he had to offer. He thought of her vulnerability, the way she'd stood on his doorstep with no pretense, no polished facade, just Claire, just the woman who'd been brave enough to tell him what she wanted, what she felt. For the first time in years, Jesse let himself wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to want more too. He set the coffee down and grabbed his phone. The screen lit up. Claire's number sitting in his call history. His thumb hovered over it. He thought of everything he'd told himself over the years, every reason he wasn't good enough, wasn't the right kind of man. But none of those reasons mattered now. He pressed the call button. Her voice came through, soft and unsure. "Jesse?" He swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he managed the words. "How about dinner?" he asked, his voice steady. "Just us. No contracts, no cameras, just you and me." There was a pause, and then finally she answered. The morning light was bright and crisp, the kind of clear that only followed a night of heavy rain. Jesse walked to his garage with a cup of coffee in hand, his breath visible in the cool air. The workday was just beginning. The usual cars were waiting, an old pickup that needed a new carburetor, a minivan that made a sound like a blender full of nails, and he was already planning the order in his head as he approached the familiar worn entrance. But something stopped him short. The empty lot next door, long overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a sagging chain-link fence, was no longer empty. He set his coffee on the workbench outside and stared at the building that had appeared overnight, or at least that's how it felt. It wasn't shiny or new, the structure itself looked older, but the facade had been scrubbed clean, the windows replaced, and the large bay door glinted in the sunlight. A new sign hung above it, bold and simple, Jesse's Customs. His chest tightened, confusion and disbelief battling for control. He took a few slow steps forward, his boots crunching on gravel, until he was standing directly in front of it. He ran his hand over the freshly painted surface of the garage door, the smooth finish cool beneath his palm. His name on the sign felt surreal, as though someone had taken the life he'd imagined a long time ago and brought it to life. The door behind him clicked open. He turned to see Claire standing there, her arms folded, but her expression soft, a little uncertain. She looked as though she wasn't sure how he'd react. "I know it's a lot," she said, stepping closer, "but I couldn't just watch you keep working out of that cramped shop. You deserve better. And I wanted to show you what I see when I look at you." Jesse opened his mouth, but the words didn't come right away. He shook his head slightly, staring back at the sign. "You did this?" She nodded. "You've given so much to everyone else. I thought it was time someone gave back to you. No strings, no conditions. It's yours." Jesse's hand fell to his side, his gaze shifting to meet hers. The magnitude of what she'd done hit him all at once. How much she must have gone through to make this happen. How she'd seen something in him worth investing in. How deeply she believed in him. "Claire," he said finally, his voice low, almost shaky. "I don't know if I can—" "You can," she interrupted. "You already have. You just didn't have the space." Jesse turned back to the building, letting the reality sink in. The place was his. His name was on the sign, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was moving forward. Claire stood beside him, quiet, giving him the moment. Her hand brushed against his, but she didn't push. She didn't need to. She'd already given him more than he ever thought possible. The air smelled of freshly cut wood and the faint tang of paint as people gathered in the yard in front of the new building. Jesse stood off to the side, hands stuffed in his pockets, his nerves winding tighter with each passing minute. He wasn't used to attention, not like this. But tonight wasn't about him. It was about what had been built here, what they'd worked for. And Claire had made sure this opening wasn't about the money or the status. It was about family. The sign was covered with a dark blue cloth, held up by sturdy brackets just above the main bay door. Everyone's eyes kept darting to it, curious, expectant. Small groups from around the town were scattered across the lot, neighbors Jesse barely knew, a few regular customers, and, most importantly, Lily and Ben. The two kids had been buzzing around since they arrived, stopping every so often to watch the sign like it was a wrapped present on Christmas morning. Jesse glanced over at Claire. She was talking to a couple of local business owners, her tone easy, relaxed. She was wearing jeans and a casual sweater tonight. No corporate polish, no high heels, just Claire. She caught him looking and gave him a small, reassuring smile. He took a deep breath and walked toward the makeshift podium Claire had set up. It was just a simple wooden platform with a mic stand, but it felt bigger somehow. He cleared his throat, the small crowd quieting as he stepped up. Hi, he started, his voice a little rough, but he pressed on. First, thanks for coming out tonight. This place. He gestured back toward the building. It's been a dream for as long as I can remember, and I've got a lot of people to thank for helping make it happen. His eyes scanned the crowd, landing briefly on Claire. But really, I just want to thank my daughter Lily. She's the reason I keep going. And now, this place isn't just about me. It's about building something for her, too. Lily beamed from her spot near the front, her face lighting up as Jessie nodded at her. Okay, Jessie said, stepping back and motioning toward the sign. Let's see it. Claire gave the signal, and two of the kids tugged the cloth free. The sign beneath read, Lily and Dad's Customs. The name was bold, but warm, the kind of name that made it clear what mattered most. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Jessie felt Lily tug at his hand. He knelt beside her, letting her wrap her arms around his neck. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. The conference room was silent, the kind of silence that only comes when something big is about to happen. The long mahogany table gleamed under the overhead lights, every seat filled by board members and executives, each one with their eyes locked on Claire. She stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the chair in front of her. She wasn't wearing one of her usual power suits today. Instead, she'd chosen a simple blouse and slacks. No jewelry, no high heels, just her. The person they thought they knew, but were about to see in an entirely different light. I'm sure you've all noticed I haven't been in the office as much lately, she began, her voice steady, but quiet. Some of you have reached out, asking if everything is okay. I want to thank you for that, and I want to take this time to tell you what's really going on. She took a breath, looking down at her hands for a moment before meeting their eyes again. I've spent my whole life in rooms like this, leading meetings, closing deals, making decisions that affect thousands of people. It's been my identity for so long that I honestly didn't know who I was outside of it. A murmur ran through the room, but Claire didn't let it distract her. She straightened her posture, her voice gaining strength. Recently, I took some time to step back, to reevaluate what I want out of life. And I realized something. I've been working so hard to build this company that I forgot to build a life. And now I've found something better, something that reminds me of what really matters. She let the weight of her words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. So today I'm announcing that I'll be stepping back from my role as CEO, not permanently, but indefinitely. I need time to focus on the things I've neglected, my family, myself, to rediscover what it means to live, not just work. The room erupted into whispers, some members exchanging surprised looks, others clearly caught off guard, but Claire remained calm, her expression unshaken. I'm confident in the team I've built, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. You're all more than capable of continuing the work we've done together, and I'll still be here, just not at the helm. It's time for me to find balance. It's time to be more than a title. She stepped back, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. The reactions around the table ranged from confusion to quiet admiration. Claire didn't focus on any of them. Instead, she turned and left the room, feeling lighter with each step she took. The living room smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. Boxes were stacked high against the walls, some half open, others still sealed, labeled with shaky handwriting. A drop cloth was spread over the worn carpet, dotted with smudges of blue and green, as the kids crouched over it, holding brushes and giggling between strokes. Lily sat cross-legged, carefully painting the word home on a wooden sign she'd insisted on making. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she drew little hearts around the letters. Ben, still small enough to get away with a mess, dabbed his brush in orange paint and started adding stars, his laughter bubbling over as a glob splattered onto the drop cloth. Jessie leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them with a faint smile. The sight was still new, seeing the two of them together, laughing like they'd known each other forever. For so long it had just been him and Lily, navigating the world together, scraping by. And now there was Ben, and with him, a kind of completeness Jessie hadn't realized he was missing. Claire appeared behind him, her sweater dusted with flour from the kitchen. She held 2 glasses of water, one of which she offered to Jessie. "They're really into it," she said softly, nodding toward the kids. He took the glass, their fingers brushing for a moment. "Yeah," he replied. "They've got the decorating handled." Claire laughed quietly, a warm sound that filled the room. She took a step closer to him, looking out at the scene before them. "I think we're starting to get the hang of this." "Starting," Jessie said, smirking. "You sure about that?" She nudged his arm playfully, and for a moment there was no weight, no pressure. Just this. Just them. Later, as the sun set outside the wide kitchen window, they sat around the table. The table wasn't new. It had come from a thrift store, still a little wobbly on one leg, but it didn't matter. Lily passed Ben a bowl of mashed potatoes, and he carefully took it, looking determined not to spill. Claire handed Jessie a platter of roasted vegetables, her smile soft and unhurried. One table, one meal, one family. As they ate, laughter filled the room, the kind that comes from knowing you've found a place to belong. The boardwalk was alive again. The winter storms had passed, leaving the planks damp but sturdy, and the familiar sounds of waves crashing and seagulls calling returned as the backdrop to bustling shops and families strolling in the late afternoon sun. Claire walked alongside Jessie, her hand brushing his every so often, though neither of them said much. Ben and Lily darted ahead, laughing as they raced toward the ice cream cart that had finally reappeared at the end of the strip. It was the same cart that had brought them together, the peeling paint now freshly redone, the faded lettering touched up to a cheerful white. The vendor stood behind it with the same easy smile, as if no time had passed at all. Ben was the first to reach it, pointing excitedly at the menu, his voice rising over the chatter of the crowd. Lily hesitated, turning back to look at Claire. "What should I get, Mommy?" Claire smiled warmly. "Anything you want." Jessie caught up, his hand on Lily's shoulder, as he leaned down to inspect the list of flavors. "Chocolate chip cookie dough sounds good. What do you think?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, and Ben quickly chimed in, "I want mint chip." The vendor handed them their cones, perfectly swirled and topped with rainbow sprinkles. Ben and Lily ran to a nearby bench, their laughter mingling with the ocean breeze as they took their first bites. Claire and Jessie followed, each holding their own cone, sharing a look of quiet contentment. The boardwalk, the kids, the simple act of standing there, it all felt like the kind of peace neither of them had thought they'd find again. But just as the moment settled, a small girl nearby let out a sharp, disappointed cry. Jessie turned and saw her, maybe 5 or 6 years old, staring down at her ice cream, now splattered across the planks. Her face was red, her lip trembling. Without a word, Jessie walked over. He knelt down, his cone still in hand, and gave the girl a kind smile. "Want to share mine?" She looked up at him, hesitant, then nodded. Jessie broke the cone in half and handed it to her. Her tears stopped as quickly as they'd come. She took a bite and a small, shy smile broke through. As Jessie stood and returned to Claire, she was watching him, her eyes soft. "You're a natural," she said. He shrugged. "I just don't like seeing kids cry." Claire reached for his free hand, giving it a small squeeze. "That's what makes you different, Jessie." The 4 of them, Claire, Jessie, Ben, and Lily, lingered there as the sun began to set. The breeze carried the